Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. All right, so this is going to be part 4, and we're really going to be concentrating on eggs in part 4, and there'll be a part 5 also discussing about eggs. All right, obviously, eggs are the most important thing there is when you're dealing with South American annuals or any kind of annuals, because there's a lot of variables that take place. It's not the easiest thing. No, of course not. If it was, then everybody would be doing it, as they say, right? I mean, with you get a chicken, right? Okay, so a chicken, when it's ready to go, it just hatches itself. All right. But unfortunately, with these South American annual eggs, it's us. We the people, have to determine when it's ready. And there's a lot of parameters that take place in order to get it to the right condition, so to speak, and that it would hatch out. And hopefully that's what the objective here is, to try to show you some examples of what you could do to try to get it to hatch out, those eggs to hatch out successfully. All right, so there's a little nursery rhyme, I guess, or story. It talks about a little girl who goes into walking in the woods, and she goes into somebody's house, and she does 3 things, right? So she goes and she breaks a chair, she eats some food, and she sleeps in a bed. Well, the people's house is owned by some bears. Well, how the bears bought the house, we don't know. Maybe they obtained it illegally, maybe, because I've never seen a bear work. Of course, I'm being facetious here, but the bears come back in the house, of course, notice that the chair is broken, the food's been touched, and someone's sleeping in the bed upstairs. Well, this little person, of course, they call Goldilocks. All right, it could be anybody, but let's just use the word Goldilocks. So what we're looking for here is a Goldilocks scenario. And if you don't know the story, what happened is there were 3 bears, and she tried the 3 different bowls. In this case, they call it porridge, which could be anything, which is called soup. And so she tried one was too cold, one was too hot, and one was just right. Right, so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the Goldilocks scenario, where it's just right. All right. So first thing we're going to talk about, there's 3 variables that come into play here. All right, and what they are is wetness. I'm going to call peat, of course. I use cocoa fiber, but certainly it's peat or cocoa fiber. If you see video number 1, you see the 2 different spawning media that can be used. All right, I'm going to call everything basically peat, because I don't use peat, but it just makes the word simplified for me. I just say peat. So, all right, so we're going to talk about, like I said, the wetness, the peat. We're then going to talk about, let's see, what do we got next? Oh, temperature. Temperature is second. And the third one is time. All right, so those are the 3 main variables that come into play when you're hatching, well, any kind of annual eggs. It could be African as well. Does the same scenario. So the first one we're going to talk about is peat wetness. All right, so if you saw my book or didn't see my book, it doesn't really matter. I'll talk about it here. I divided wetness into 5 sections. Okay, I believe. Let's see. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. So 1 being water incubated, which it's actually sitting in water, which is not recommended for annual species, although some can do that. There are some Brazilian fishes that you can raise in water. Won't get into those, but it can work. It's not recommended, but it can work. And on the other end of the spectrum, which is number 5, number 5 is completely dry, which would be like dust, I guess you could say. I don't have any of those examples with me, but you'll have to just think about just kind of like dust in the wind, and that's it. It's sand in a desert, okay, or dirt in a desert, let's say. Completely dry, lack of water, right? Whereas the other one is completely wet because it is in water. And so we're going to focus on 2, 3, and 4. All right, so if you saw my last video, which was, I believe, part 3, I showed a little example and talked about what was a good wetness for peat. All right, so I took a net and scooped it out of the water, and then grabbed that net and squeezed it really, really hard, all right, because I'm not going to hurt those eggs. I squeezed it hard a couple, 3, 4 times, fluffed it up, squeezed it again. All right, there's no water coming out. At that point in time, without placing it on any kind of paper, all right, or anything like that to dry it out, that's what I'm calling number 2. All right, so number 2 is where you've squeezed as much water as you can out of that net or whatever it may be that you have using for that, cheesecloth or who knows what you're using. And squeezed it out, and you've got no water dripping out anymore. That's number 2. All right, number 3 is where you've taken that peat out of the net, and now you place it on top of some kind of absorbent paper, whether it be newspaper or newsprint or some kind of shipping paper or anything like that that's kind of absorbent, not something that doesn't absorb water, because that would be kind of silly, right? So it sits on top of that for, let's say, maybe an hour. All right, now here's where, it gets tricky, as they say, right? So it could be 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, let's say. All right, so I put it on for an hour, but you know what? Sometimes I'm doing something else, and 2 hours pass by. That's fine. I mean, we're looking at basically the same thing. It's a couple hours here or there. It's going to sit on top of this absorbent material, and the water is going to get absorbed. And if you see video 3, you'll see that. And that one sat for approximately 1 hour. And so you could see that the water that remained or came out of the peat and remained on top of the paper. And you could see how much there was after 1 hour. Again, 2 or 3, that's fine. That represents level 3. Okay. So the next level, which would be level 4. So level 4 is going to go a little bit beyond that. Okay. So it's going to be sitting on the paper, but it's going to be sitting on the paper for more hours than that. Let's say 5 or 6 hours, and or maybe more. All right. I don't really recommend more than that. I mean, if you want to put it on, I'd say 5 or 6 is probably maximum. Let's say 6. Just a round number. Again, it's arbitrary. It could be any amount. 5 3/4, right? It doesn't matter. It's 6. So at 6 hours, basically, we're looking at level 4. All right. So with level 4, it's going to be drier. Okay. If you saw my video in video 3, okay, it was just kind of starting out to getting some dry, let's say, caps. I mean, looking at the ocean, you've got white caps, okay? As the ocean turns, you've got white caps as it's making a wave. All right. Well, as the peat's sitting there, some of the higher places is starting to get dried out. All right. That's what I'm looking at, right, for level 3. Level 4 is it's going to be like it's going to be dry over the whole top of it. Okay, or even more. Where you're looking at it, you're going to grab that peat in your hand, right? Again, cocoa fiber peat. You're going to grab that peat in your hand, and it's not going to form a ball. Okay, it's going to kind of dissolve. Okay, just kind of like break away. That's the point of level 4. Whereas level 3, okay, it's there, it forms a ball, but it can break away. All right, and going back to level 2, if you squeeze that and squeeze that hard, it doesn't break away. It's not dry at all. It just remains as a solid ball or mass. So now we got the 3 different levels of wetness. All right. It's again, it's arbitrary. There is no right or wrong here. All right, you can have anything in between. All right, all 3 levels will work, and I'm going to say that they will because I have tried them, and you can be successful all 3 levels. But certainly shooting for the number 3, which is just a little bit of dryness, not too wet, not too dry. All right, it's kind of in the middle. But if you go either way, you know what? Fish aren't going to cry. they're going to do the best they can with what they got. And that's where the other two variables come into play. Right? So that pretty much has got that for peak wetness. Right? Next one is temperature. All right, now this, of course, we can get very granular on how we're going to deal with temperature. So I've been kind of thinking about this and kind of thinking, well, let me just set up some examples. All right, now again, this is not set in stone. All right, this is not exactly, these are just rough estimates. All right. So the low level, okay, and I'm just saying low level, would be anything below 70 degrees. All right, now obviously 68 is right there, right, which is 20 Celsius. All right, 68 is approximately 70. Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay, it's on the border, right? But I'm talking about going a little bit lower, but just trying to, put these things into three general groups. Again, where it's cold and just right, and a little bit too hot or warm, shall we say. All right. So can fishes be incubated 60 degrees? Of course, sure they can, All right. Obviously, a little bit warmer you get, a little bit faster they'll incubate. All right. So we're going to say below 70, that's what we're going to say is cold. All right. Now that below 70, okay, let's say you're taking a test and you're at school. All right. You got A and you got A minus, or B plus, right? Okay. So when you're talking about the area around 70 degrees, right? You got A minus or B plus, right? It's in that area. It's like close enough, as they say. Right. So you got the 70s. All right. 70s would be the optimal range. All right. Again, when you get to the higher 70s, right? Now you're getting too hot, where you're getting, let's say, in this case, let's call the 60 to 50. Let's call that. 70s to 60s. Let's call those B minus, C plus. Okay, you're passing, but it's cold. You don't want to be like in the 50 degree range. You don't want anything at 115 Celsius, which is 59. That's not really so great because the fishes aren't used to that. They're used to a little bit warmer incubation temperature. So when you move into the A range, all right, where it's warmer, okay, so you're looking at, 70, 77, 78, up to like 82. All right. Now, definitely over 85, I'd say, even 82, 85, let's say, 85, 86. So that's 30 Celsius is 86. 30 Celsius is a little bit too warm. That would be really not recommended. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe 65. It works. People can do it. You got a basement. It's cold, right? You try not to do that, as they say. All right. So you try to keep within that range of 65 to 85. All right, somewhere in between there. And so, just arbitrarily saying, in fact, those ranges can change. I'm just thinking about it. Now maybe I'm going to say, all right, maybe it's 65 to 72, maybe is one range. Maybe that's lower, so to speak. And then 72 to 80, or 72 to 78, maybe 72 to 78, that 6 degree range. Maybe that's a better range. And then 78 to 85, maybe that's a higher range. And so it just kind of gives you an idea. Right now, I'll look at my thermometers, temperatures. I got 78. It's 80 degrees in here, basically. And I live in California, and it can get warm in the summertime. And, I'll take the temperature down. In the wintertime, it was going in, below 70 in here. And it gets above 80, I just turn on the air conditioning, and so. But it's comfortable now. But it's, again, that gives you an idea. I keep my eggs inside of a styrofoam box. And although I probably don't need to, that's an old wives' tale, old Killifish tale, or you know, you get a basement or something like that, you want to keep them a little bit warmer, so you keep them inside a styrofoam box. I just do that because it's just like habit, and I've been doing it for years. So it's just what I do. Keeps them in one place, keeps them out of trouble. So the third factor that we have is time. All right, so time really is dependent on the other two. And time is a crazy thing and hard to say. I remember hatching Nothobrancus out. It's the African angelfishes. I used to hatch them out in 3 weeks, and people say, "Well, that's impossible. You can't do it in 3 weeks." But because of the other two factors, which are, the wetness of the peat and the incubation temperature, the time changed. And if I certainly had a little bit drier and a little bit lower temperature, then that would have affected the time, and it would have taken longer. But it is what it is. Now, right now, I'm kind of satching things out. I had, a couple out at 1 month. Don't necessarily need to do 1 month, but I've noticed even at 1 month I'll get belly sliders, all right, which I will talk about in video number 5, which is the next video after this. And so I'll get belly sliders even in that. And so 2 months, 3 months, I'll get good fry in 1 month. I'll get good fry 2 months. I'll get good fry in 3 months. Do I go further than that, 4, 5, 6 months? I could, but I know that there's nothing really that's going to come out. 3 months or so, and when I say 3 months, not exactly 3 months to the day, it's 3 months plus or minus. And it's just kind of an idea, right? All right, so that's what 12 weeks. So if you did 10 weeks or 14 weeks, that's fine. It's close enough. But if you do, 5, 6 weeks, 5, 6 months, they could be there, right? If you have a lower temperature and you have, if it's drier, that certainly longer time is what prevails. All right, so now in the video, I'll say my little, what do we say, disclosure statement, saying that, hey, what I do and how I do it is definitely just me, right? Not necessarily going to work for you, and if it does work the same, that's great, that's fantastic, and you're successful, and fantastic. But if you've already been doing it a certain way, and it works for you, and that works, you don't change. I mean, this is just, again, these are just ideas, these are just parameters, these are things that help you along the path to get to the promised land, so to speak, which would be hatching out the eggs. And, again, by far, this is the most difficult thing, because the fishes do, again, as you saw in my last videos, I say that there's 2 things that they do, right? They eat and they reproduce. So laying eggs is one thing, but getting them to hatch is something else. And I hope that this video will help you with that. And again, what I do and what I have done isn't necessarily going to work for you, but do the best you can. All right, so what I've done is I've made a little chart here. Hopefully we can, as they say, follow along at home. All right, so you got wetness on top, temperature with a T, which is the middle variable, and then time, which is a small t. All right, so if you look here, we've got 2 as being the wetness. We're going to start with 2. So the arrow up is meaning that it's wetter, right? It's wetter rather than being drier. Okay. So then you've got possibility of temperature being hotter or colder, and of course you get also the temperature being just right? So that's not in here. Again, there's another scenario where you can have 6 variables here. We're just going to pick 4 right now. So we're looking where the temperature is increased or decreased, and where the time has increased or decreased. Now, again, when you've got time and we talked about time previously. Time is a relative thing, right? All right. Temperature, well, again, temperature is kind of relative, and wetness is relative, right? Depending on what you're doing. So again, this is just some examples here. So if it's too wet, and you increase the temperature on the wetness, and you have a longer period of time, you're probably not going to end up with anything. Probably a zero. And the opposite is true. If it's too wet, but you decrease the temperature and decrease the time, probably over time you're probably not going to get anything either. Right? Probably the best scenario again is always in the middle. So if the wetness is increased and you increase the temperature or decrease the temperature, and conversely increasing or decreasing time. So if it's too wet meaning level 2. I mean, it's not that it's too wet. You're at level 2, which you've just squeezed the bag. You've increased the temperature, but you've decreased the time. Okay, so the temperature is up, decreasing the time. Shorter time, you're probably going to be successful. And the same thing with number 2 here. The third one is if it's wet, right, level 2, you now decrease the temperature, but you increase the time, right? It's going to take longer for you to go with those eggs, right? Probably going to be successful at that as well, right? So that's 2. All right, so now let's look at 4. Okay, so if you remember what 4 was, of course, 4 is a little bit drier. Okay, it's been sitting on some paper for, let's say, 5-6 hours. All right, it's been a while. Right. So 4 again, going down, the arrow's going down because it's drier. All right, so if you increase the temperature and increase time, you're probably not going to get anything because it's dry to start with. So if you increase the temperature on something that's dry, all right, and increase the time on it, all right, probably nothing's going to hatch. The fish are just going to die inside there. And conversely, it's the same way. If it was too dry and you decrease the temperature, making it colder, right, and you did it for a longer period of time, all right, will you get something? Well, I got 0 here. Maybe this should be a check. Maybe it should be a check, but not so much. Okay, and it's possible. 4 can work. Okay, just like we previously had 2. 2 works. It does work. Okay, now when I put a 0, that doesn't mean that you're never going to get anything. It's just that you're going to get an optimal hatch. Okay, so let's say this is a check with a minus. All right, and probably let's change 4, and let's put 4 as being a check minus as well. Right. It's going to modify that on the fly. Right. So it's not optimal conditions. Can it work? Yeah, it can work. It can work. All right, it's probably better overall is if it's drier, all right, and you do increase the temperature, all right, increasing the temperature, right, you want to decrease the time. All right, you want it to go shorter. So if it's drier and it's making it hotter, all right, you want to kind of decrease the time. All right, again, did that work? You know what? Maybe let me give that a minus. I'm going to give all these minuses. Does it work? Yeah, it works, but because it's drier, right? The fishes don't, well, I don't know what they feel because I don't know how they feel. I told you this is really complex, right? So does drier work? Yes, it works, all right? I'm putting minuses because maybe that's not the best scenario, but it can work, all right? All right, so another scenario would be if it's drier and you are then decreasing the temperature, so you're making it colder and it's dry. So it's cold and dry, and you increase the time. Yeah, will it work? Yeah, of course it will work. Again, we don't know, right? I mean, you'll get stuff. You may not get an optimal hatch, but it'll work. Right. So obviously, of course, that brings us to 3. Okay. So 3, I'm not even going to show you the chart with 3, right? Because 3, basically, you know what happens, right? If it's pretty much correct, for the temperature and where the wetness is at the level 3, no matter what you do, basically, if you made it warmer or colder, all right, you just remember that as far as the time goes, if you've got 3 or 2 or 4, and you increase the temperature, all right, you want to decrease time. And conversely, if you decrease the temperature, then you want to increase time. So the longer it sits in the bag, when it's colder, is better. All right. And conversely, if the temperature is warmer, the shorter it sits in the bag, is better. All right. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. Again, there's so many different variables here that go into play, and I'm not telling you that what's right or what's wrong. I'm just saying that these are possible scenarios that could take place, and these are things to just look for when you're hatching out the eggs. I mean, for me, I'll just talk about me. I try to shoot for 3. All right. Do I end up with a 2? Have I used 2 in the past? Yes, I have done 2 in the past. I've done 2 in the past. I have been successful with 2s. I remember a time way back in the 80s, I did not put anything on paper at all. I put it directly in the bags after I squeezed it. And was I successful? Yeah. Again, 80 degrees, level 2, has things out in 3 weeks. But now I'm putting it on paper just a little bit to absorb some of the water. I've been doing that for a while. To get level 3, that's where I like to be. Level 4, does it sit too long? Yeah. Sometimes I make a mistake. What I like to do, I reach back here. It's let me do this. Okay, so let's say I have my paper, right? Okay, just a lid. Doesn't matter what you use. It's irrelevant, right? I pick my lid up off the floor. I drop. All right. So if it's sitting there for a while and you go, hey, I need to go to the store. I don't know how long it's going to be. Maybe I'm going to be gone for a couple hours or something like that. All right. Well, one way to slow down, all right, how it's developed, how it's drawing, is take another lid, all right, and just place that lid on top of the other lid. All right. You have a lid sandwich. All right. So what's that going to do is it's going to stop evaporation of the water, right? Obviously, it's still going to go inside the paper. Okay. So that doesn't do that, but at least air evaporation, that doesn't take place. So that'll slow down the process. When you open it up after 2 hours or 3 hours, it'll look like it's 1 hour. Now, obviously, more water will be absorbed in the paper, and that's a different thing. So we're fighting with 2 things. We're fighting with air, and we're fighting with the paper itself. All right. So when I get up to like 6 hours, let's say, and it's been drying out for 6 hours, if that was to happen, and it has happened, I've come by and collected peat in the afternoon and thought that I'm going to be putting it in bags, and all of a sudden I wake up the next morning and go, oh my gosh, I forgot to put them in bags, and come out and it's pretty dry. I'll just re-wet it, so to speak. I'll take a spray bottle and I'll spray water on top of it and try to build up the humidity inside that. So the peat or coconut fiber, try to get a little bit more wet, because you don't want it like super dry. And, you think, you say, all right, well, these fish are out in the wild, right? And they're drying out. And if you saw one of my videos in Bolivia, and you saw, I think the location Kimome, it was Brusoa and Splendidus and Trichonectes. It's you see it just looks bone dry. You think, wow, it's bone dry, and that's what I'm going to do, is bone dry. Well, you got to remember, it's not like a desert out there. Okay, it's dry, but it'll rain occasionally. It will rain. It just won't rain to the point where it inundates with water, it floods, right? It just kind of rains, all right, and that kind of keeps the moisture in the ground. And so, again, that's why we're looking for the 3 spot, because 3 is where it's dry, but it's not too dry. And therefore, you have a better chance of being successful, because even if it's a little bit colder or a little bit warmer, right, at least it gives you a fighting chance that now, okay, if I know it's colder, and I'm keeping it colder, then now I can incubate for a longer period of time rather than something where it's warmer and you're not going to be able. I mean, then you are going to incubate at a shorter period of time. But you don't want to get those two scenarios mixed up. I got to remember always that when you've got something, when you've got it's warmer, you're going to do it for a shorter period of time, and when it's colder, you're going to do it for a longer period of time. All right, well, I guess that wraps this up. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I don't know. Like I said, it's a very, very complex, and I was thinking about it. It was so simple. I was going to just do a few minutes on it, but it's not going to work. I knew as I thought about it that this isn't going to happen. And I'm trying to keep this as basic and simple as I can. And, hopefully it works for you, and I wish you success. And see you in the next video.